In this video, we'll be reviewing Meghan Gupta's TED Talk titled, "Dear American Media, You Are Embarrassingly Biased." Are you well versed with the events happening around the world? Chances are, you're more cognizant of what's happening within your own country than beyond its borders. With the advent of the internet, we now have a plethora of news sources on online blogs, social media, and live streaming. Yet, for many, cable news and online articles from mainstream outlets continue to be their primary sources of global news. So, we must ask, do these sources fairly cover international journalism? Do they responsibly relay significant global events? Or is there an inherent bias favoring stories from certain countries? TEDx speaker Meghan Gupta tackled these questions in 2016, aiming to unveil the full picture of how American TV media broadcasts global news. In our video today, we're going to spotlight and review her TED Talk. Gupta begins her speech by discussing the Paris terrorist attacks that transpired in November 2015. This dreadful event, claimed by ISIS, coincided with bombings in Beirut and Baghdad. Given the higher death toll in these Middle East attacks compared to the Paris incident, Gupta made the following observations.
I expected to wake up the next morning, November 14th, and see a headline something like this: "Mass killings in France and the Middle East leave hundreds dead and injured," or "ISIL claims responsibility for multiple attacks overnight." In reality, I woke up on that dark November morning and turned on the TV to see this: terrorist attack in France kills over 100. Paris declares state of emergency. For weeks, I couldn't pinpoint why I felt a deep sense of shock and dread every time I saw an article, grieving Facebook post, or news clip about the events in Paris. Finally, I realized that my inner turmoil was not a sympathetic reaction to the victims in Paris, but an angry response on behalf of the hundreds of victims ignored by our Western media simply for being too foreign.
Gupta's highlighted quote certainly delivers a powerful and empathic statement that implies a marked preference for covering attacks on Western countries over those deemed foreign. This bias seems evident as American media powerhouses such as The Guardian, CNN, and ABC persistently tracked and updated the Paris terror attacks, both online and on the ground. In contrast, the concurrent attacks in Baghdad received a noticeably different treatment. For the same time frame, these attacks were largely left unreported by these same outlets that had vigorously documented the Paris events. Major news sources providing coverage of the Baghdad attacks during the same period were Al Jazeera, The Times of Israel, and Time magazine. However, Al Jazeera and The Times of Israel, not being mainstream American news outlets, do not reach the majority of the American audience. Thus, many Americans remained uninformed about the Baghdad attacks. Nonetheless, there is one area where Gupta's analysis falls short. The Beirut attacks, occurring simultaneously with the Paris bombings, were indeed covered by the same mainstream juggernauts. Therefore, it's evident that while the American mainstream media placed the Paris attacks under the limelight, they simultaneously reported on the Beirut incidents, providing the public with an opportunity to be informed about these events. The crucial disparity, it seems, lies in the lack of coverage of the Baghdad bombings by the American mainstream media. This omission suggests either a distinct bias or a disinterest in broadcasting significant events from specific regions or countries. Adding weight to Gupta's assertions about American mainstream media's bias is a fact presented by Sean Darling Hammond from The Nation. He points out that on the day of the bombings, a mere 1,684 articles were published about the Beirut and Baghdad attacks, whereas the Paris attacks saw a whopping 21,000 articles on the same day. This disparity creates a predicament for the American public, as they are seemingly steered towards focusing predominantly on news events from certain regions, like France in this case. This narrow view is concerning as it inadvertently leaves them uninformed about significant events in other parts of the world. Consequently, the American public may unintentionally develop a bias, skewing their attention towards overreported events and neglecting those that are underrepresented by the media.
On average, Whites make up around 82% of journalism, while all non-whites combine to form only 18%. For an industry that claims to serve diverse news to an increasingly diverse public, it's extremely problematic that most major newsrooms are dominated by one race, the white race.
The highlighted statement underscores a persistent issue in U.S. journalism, a notable lack of diversity. This deficiency negatively affects news as it results in possibly an underrepresentation of certain communities and areas of the world in mainstream media. Disconcertingly, this situation doesn't seem to be improving over time. As per the Pew Research Center's 2022 data, whites constitute 76% of the journalism workforce, leaving minorities to fill the remaining 24%. Gupta proceeds to explain how foreign-focused channels are demonized and attacked by the American media, despite their focus on covering foreign events. One example was the Al Jazeera America website, and this was her conclusion in regards to why it was shut down.
In the end, Al Jazeera disappeared from the American media at the behest of white executives who were afraid that the network was too Arab-based. The irony is apparent. Although American media is almost solely constructed of whites, American executives criticize and exclude non-white media for the sole purpose of being too focused on one race.
This brings us to the concluding point of our review of Gupta's video: workforce diversity versus operational hurdles faced by foreign news sources. We will evaluate these differences by looking back at the example of Al Jazeera America shutting down. While Gupta raised points regarding workforce and content diversity that could have contributed to the challenges, they were not the primary reasons behind Al Jazeera's eventual shutdown. The channel faced more prominent obstacles leading to its downfall, attempting to carve out a space in the already bustling arena of American primetime news. Al Jazeera grappled with lawsuits and struggled to find a network to host the channel. According to the Washington Times and The Guardian, in its heyday, the channel drew between 20,000 to 40,000 viewers, indicating a lack of interest from the American public. This is understandable as the majority of Americans are more likely to be interested in news directly affecting them, explaining why U.S. national news often receives more attention and airtime compared to international channels. Therefore, Gupta's claims of a lack of workforce and resulting content diversity may be a premature judgment of the demise of the news source in America. However, there exists a foreign news company that has carved out a niche within the American mainstream media due to high interest in their reporting: the BBC. The British Broadcasting Corporation is not only prominent in covering UK news, but also stories from various countries worldwide. Its successes in the US may be due to the close ties between the US and the UK, including English being both countries' primary language, and cultural ties from the early days of America's founding. The American mainstream media is not perfect, whether that be in over- and underreporting of events, diversity and inclusion issues, or even learning how to run a successful and profitable business in a new market. Given the relatively few news articles often reported on foreign countries, assessing the credibility of news can be a daunting task. This is where we recommend the use of Biasly's news checker. You can simply paste the URL from any news article and assess its biases and reliability. This tool allows you to evaluate the quality of sources, quotations, and political leanings, providing a more comprehensive understanding of the news content. Get started today at Biasly.com.